Okay, no cover to show here. The jacket was probably long since lost before I got this, but this is Television and Antisocial Behavior. And I believe this was from like 1979 or so. This is from, much earlier than that. This is Academic Press, 1973. So, and this is actually, looks like it was from London originally. This is a fascinating book on a very dry read. This is a more of a scholarly, this is probably somebody's thesis here. This is by Milgram, Shotland. This is a fascinating study of how people process antisocial behavior when they see it in television and film. And that, as you are probably well aware from some of my other reviews, I'm very fascinated with the way people absorb information from media. And just a word about my personal history with this. I was raised outside the matrix, so to speak. My parents brought me and my siblings up without a television in the house. And their reasoning was not any kind of radical religious reasoning. It was really, a lot of it was a very practical reason of, we have 5 children, we don't really want to buy 5 television sets, and we don't want all the kids fighting over what to watch. Plus, my mom had been a school teacher, and she wasn't about to have us just sitting there mindlessly watching a television. So we did not have a television. As a result, I read a lot and ran around and played in the creek and caused trouble in the neighborhood and found all kinds of things to do other than watch television. And I was always amazed as a result of that, going over to friends' houses and having to pry them, almost literally pry them out of their houses to go play in the actual objective reality. I had several really good friends that it took an act of Congress to get them off their couch to actually engage with the real world. So ever since then, I've been very fascinated by that, of how people digest television, because I would go over to people's houses and watch the people watching the television and see how engrossed they became in this content that they had no personal connection to, that they would just sit and watch the TV, and the television provided content to them that they would then adopt into their own lives as though it was very personal to them. Be it a sports thing, be it a news program or whatever, they would adopt these television personalities as people that, almost like people in their real lives. And I found that very disturbing, because I'm thinking, even as a kid, I'm thinking, you don't really know these people. I don't really know these people. We'll never meet these people, but the way you're talking about them and referencing them is as though you actually know these people. So I say that because I've had from a young age a viewpoint of that's kind of outside of the norm, not intentionally, again, not because of my parents having any kind of crazy radical views, but the older I got, the more that became a really stark difference in cultures, of seeing how people behaved who watched television for several hours a day versus myself and my family who did not. And it was always funny when I would have friends come over and they would ask, what do y'all do? Y'all have a TV. What do you do? So my dad used to always joke that people, when they had a television, their living room would look like a bus station with all the chairs facing the same direction. And they wouldn't be circled around, so you could actually talk to each other. So just the configuration of socially of how people organized themselves was different once the television got involved. So I've approached a lot of that from my own personal curiosity about that, because just watching people's behavior and the way people behaved socially when they're pulling a lot of their social cues from a television has always been interesting to me. Now, one of the studies, or one of the important things in this study is, and I'll give a quick synopsis of this and wrap it up, but one of the things that they were trying to figure out was how people adapt, or how people use this information when they watch an antisocial act. Say someone, in this case, they're they're using a little donation thing. A lot of you are familiar with like the Jerry's Kids or something like that, one of those little donation boxes that you might see by a cash register or something. And what they did is they showed a test audience a movie, an actual narrative, where in that story they have one of these little boxes full of money. And they present it in three different formats. They have one where the person robs it and gets away with it. They have another where they rob it and they get caught and are punished and that sort of thing. Then they have another where it's presented just not, I don't think it's presented with any context at all. It's just they see them take the money out of this little donation thing, and that's that. And it's never really addressed one way or the other. And I'm paraphrasing greatly here. But what they wanted to see was how people, once they had seen that, even portrayed in the negative light, how they would react to that. So they created a situation where the people then go to to get paid for participating in the study, they go to this office to pick up their check. Well, at this office, it was intentionally closed. And then they set up an area with a little donation box that was obviously a little plexiglass box that had money in it. And they created a situation that would be intentionally frustrating for the participants in this study, so that when they went and they were denied payment, they would then see this box and they could then act out what they had seen in the movie of breaking this open and taking the money, if they were so inclined. And what they learned from that was really surprising, that even in instances where this was presented as an antisocial bad act to do, that people would still mimic that behavior, that regardless of how the behavior is presented to the audience, despite whatever judgment is attached to it, be it a good or bad social connotation, that people would still, it would put an idea in their head that would never have otherwise been there. So I think that's a really important thing to remember in regards to the way people take media in, because we watch a lot of things on television that we think, I would never actually do that. But in fact, it's loading our psyche with information and a lot of antisocial behavior that we'll tell ourselves, I would never actually engage in that, but we've actually now seen it modeled. And in some ways, we've seen it modeled successfully, where part of us, our little reptilian brain, says that's actually an effective use of force or an effective use of theft or whatever. So really interesting stuff in here. And I'm paraphrasing a lot in this because there's a lot of information. Again, very dry read. This is not one of those where you're just going to sit and read it cover to cover in a night, because a lot of this is, I bought this more as a reference and then kind of got sucked into it. But this is definitely one of those that will definitely help you understand the mechanism of television and its effect on the viewers. And I think it's also important to know, if you want to take it a little darker place, that obviously people other than me have read this. If this study existed in 1973, you can bet that a lot of our modern television programmers are well aware of this study and its implications. So that means that there are people that are deliberately creating content that in some cases might be deliberately put out in order for people to mimic those behaviors. So also, another aside there is the way your brain views a violent act such as murder. That apparently your brain cannot discern, your subconscious mind is like a small child, and you can't differentiate between a real murder and a very effectively staged murder in a television program. So when you see an accurately or realistically depicted murder on television, there's a part of your brain that will always believe that you witnessed that act, and that's impossible to undo. So one of the other things is, by the time, and I forget, when this came out, there was not near as much violent programming out there as there is now. But the implications of that are huge, of how people then process violence. That someone, by the time they're in their 30s, have watched numerous, possibly thousands of violent criminal activities, And in a way, it's like part of their brain has helplessly watched these things take place. And then there's another darker part of their brain that goes, some of that worked. So the implications of that, again, on society at large are huge. And this is another one of those things where I think it behooves us to take a big step back in how we digest our culture and where our culture is really coming from. Is it actually coming from person-to-person interaction, or how much of this are we being programmed with by way of our television set? So I'm going to use the end card here to link a couple other views, the 4 arguments for the elimination of television book, as well as the I'll dig up the other one. I'll think of it once I shut off the camera, but I'll put up the 2 that I'm thinking about here for you to peruse if you're curious about this sort of thing. But anyway, really interesting study, not easy to find. I think you could probably run this down on Amazon, but this is a harder book to find, but very important in its broader cultural implications.